Alright, flannel shirt check. Dad's on a hunting trip, and he hasn't been home in a few days.
I'll stumble back in sooner or later.
Dad's on a hunting trip.
With that iconic line, a series was born. One that became a force of late-night television, a frenzy of fandom who loved it for its focus on themes of religion, fate, perseverance, and family, who fervently speculated and blogged endlessly about their beloved characters and hated villains, who shipped like nobody has ever shipped before and might never truly ship again. And for 5 long seasons, despite some hardships here and there and a few rocky starts with the writing, looking at you, Bugs.
Because something's coming.
More bugs.
Yeah, a lot more.
It maintained the investment of millions, as the stakes grew and grew, from a couple of boys trying to find their missing dad and track down the demon who killed their mother, into an epic confrontation between good and evil that cost our protagonists everything. And it ended on a high, with an episode that is still regarded as one of the greatest finales of all time. Swan Song, a story that interweaved the tragic with the heroic, that showed us the true core behind everything, that brotherly love could win in the face of utter monstrosity and conquer with the help of a renegade angel fighting against the lies he had been told for millennia with his catchphrase, "Hey assbutt."
Hey, ass butt.
Ass butt?
But it didn't end there. Despite it seeming as if everything had built to this moment and been concluded. The greatest evils of heaven and hell had been defeated and sealed away. Yet the show was, much like Castiel in those final minutes, brought back for some arcane and unknown reason, and from that point on, it was never going to be the same. Today we answer the question that has plagued me for years, since I watched all 15 seasons the first time, and then keeps plaguing me again every time I rewatch all 15 seasons over and over each year. Look, I never said I was smart with my time or my entertainment, so let's figure it out. What went wrong with Supernatural?
What's happening?
Seems like they should stop.
They can't stop.
Now, an obvious place to begin, in my mind at least, is right at the very basis of the changes that occurred to the seasons and the seasonal structure. Because despite everything feeling all sort of wrapped up and tied up by the end of season 5, from a bunch of narrative perspectives, we get the hook of seeing Sam released from the cage that he was supposed to be stuck in with Lucifer and Michael, a thing which is our lead into the next season, and would set up a theme that continues for a long time. Namely, that every season sort of ends with a hook that tells us what's going to happen in the next season, and then the next season is just spent dealing with that problem until another problem turns up at the end. And so that's how things will continue for at least 9 more seasons.
What did Death call this?
The darkness.
Now, let me be clear. This is not an uncommon way of doing things. Most regularly broadcast television did this after all. It's a way of keeping your audience coming back because they want to see the cliffhanger get resolved in some way. But Supernatural lost a satisfactory element and almost went backwards in its own development as a show because these seasons didn't really have too much of an overarching clear narrative that existed outside of those seasons. There wasn't really a clear long-term goal or point that we as an audience were moving towards, and instead it felt a lot as if they were just pushing out the core premise and the characters for as long as they physically could, while it was still profitable and getting views. I think a big part of this lack of vision is the fact that the show lost its major showrunner, and the person who had come up with the idea of Supernatural and what the initial story was going to be Eric Kripke. He left after those initial 5 seasons, when the show had built its way up from Monster of the Week Brothers Adventure Across America
Don't do this.
into that grand story of heaven and hell and the ambiguity of good and evil in the face of these massive presence beings who didn't view humans as worth anything.
This many gods under one roof.
Gods.
And before we get down to brass,
In that time, there was at least a clarity of where the road was going, that we were carrying on for something, and that something was supposed to be the peace at the end. A piece that came out of a fascinating reversal of the two main characters from the start, with Sam accepting the forever trapping in the cage as part of his hunter's duty to take out Lucifer, who he felt he had released by his own actions, and Dean settling down into the civilian life with the person that he loved.
You okay?
Yeah, I'm good.
But each of the seasons beforehand had built to that, though. We had seen more and more of both of those characters and the world that had established that this was where things were actually going. The cliffhangers and other elements were all meant to build up the big Lucifer and Michael fight at the end. We saw Sam slowly becoming more obsessed with hunting and abandoning any chance of a normal life or existing outside of hunting.
You know I'm not coming back.
And we saw Dean deal with the ramifications of connections outside of hunting, and gaining a desire to want to live and survive beyond his duty. Now, don't worry, we will absolutely be talking about what Season 15 does with all this established character development, but before we can get to that season, we have a few chapters of stuff I want to talk about which set it up. But as I was saying, Eric Kripke left, and it became very apparent that there wasn't a greater behind-the-scenes showrunner who had a clear finishing point in their mind, as each season's villain and each season's narrative very immediately set up the continuation of the brothers' journey, but didn't necessarily build into a larger notion of anything. While dealing with Azazel, the demon blood in Sam, Lilith and the angels is all part of setting up where Season 5 will reward us for investing time and effort into keeping up with what we are being shown and told, that isn't so true afterwards. Sure, Castiel becoming a mad god and opening Purgatory leads to the Leviathans, that is an immediate connection, but the Leviathan season doesn't really set up Metatron, and Amara, and Crowley after it, much in the same way that anything there doesn't really set up Lucifer returning, Jack the Nephilim, and alternate Michael.
Michael.
At this point, I'm sure a few of you are looking at me as if I'm fucking crazy because you haven't watched the full series and the names that I've just been saying are absolutely confusing, but trust me, that could have been a whole lot worse. I didn't even mention people like Sam Campbell, Abaddon, the fucking Stein family, the British men of letters, or Asmodeus. And I won't be diving into those, not right now, because all of those fuckers get their own chapter in just a little bit. What I am trying to illustrate here is that each of these disparate parts act almost as if they are their own shows, only that they are gutting the characters and setting of the previous supernatural show to build off of. And that's actually because each one of those has its own showrunner, who is presumably trying to build to their own thing, but has no idea the long-term nature of their job or the show itself, and therefore don't really have a clear finishing finale line in mind. When Eric Kripke left, we had Sarah Gamble, who did the Castiel Evil season and the Leviathan season, which, as I mentioned beforehand, that's obvious. We see how those work together.
They held on inside me.
Who the hell?
Leviathan!
After her was Jeremy Carver, whose whole thing was kind of the fall of heaven and hell after all the long fights and brutal murdering that had gone on, and then became the Mark of Cain story, which then became the release of the darkness, because Actually, I don't know, that one, ideas were running a bit thin by that point, and there honestly isn't even much of a connection between that initial Metatron Fall of Heaven and the Amara stuff that came later, if we're being 100% real, aside from them being tangentially related to God making mistakes.
Spare the universe.
And finally, we have Robert Singer and Andrew Dabb for the last 4 seasons, who go on quite the rampage of just throwing shit out there like evil possessed presidents and a bizarre storyline around his child with an assistant that arguably Lucifer sexually violates if you think about it hard enough, and then the position the show takes on that sexual violation baby that she has due to that whole being tricked into sex with the devil and how she should keep the child and yada yada.
Stop disrespecting the God inside of you.
He's gonna kill me.
Alternate timelines and God being evil, which we will get to when it comes to talking season 15, don't you worry. That villain is getting a whole chapter to himself.
Yeah, you know, I have to say, I didn't see the whole evil turn thing coming.
Also, that final showrunner error is a real yikes one, because it felt very much like they had just run out of people. Because Robert Singer was the show's producer for the whole time, not a showrunner. And Andrew Dabb was a perfectly okay-ish writer, though the show that he was meant to be really working on was the Supernatural Bloodline spin-off that was supposed to occur from an episode he wrote for the show. An episode that is universally panned as one of the absolute worst fucking things to happen.
In the middle of my life. Help me find the...
It turns out Chicago monster crime families with nothing related to the Winchesters ain't really something people are massively invested in. Though, honestly, most Supernatural spin-offs never really make it off the ground floor, and even when they do, it's hardly worth tuning into them. R.I.P. Wayward Sisters. I would have watched you.
Hiya, ladies.
Hey, Donna.
But all these showrunners, before the people stuck with the job at the end tried to wrap it up, well, they all hung around and did a little bit before moving on to bigger things, and presumably working on something that they actually cared about, rather than just being the one tasked with keeping Supernatural going because of how popular it had been when it was someone's little baby pilot series. The love really felt like it had left the room a long time ago, and that reflected in the fact that nobody stuck it out and gave the audience a clear developed story until the end that rewarded our time spent on it and made us feel as if every step we had seen had been a building block towards this grander finale. But this issue didn't just affect the seasons and the stories around the seasons. It also affected another thing that was much beloved about the early show and slowly became more and more tedious as things dragged on, and that was the characters that we knew and loved, and who were the central part of what drove the Impala of Supernatural along. Sam and Dean were a pretty darn big reason for a lot of fans coming to the show and sticking with it. And that isn't just because they're two very attractive boys, though I'm sure that absolutely didn't hurt the audience getting invested in them.
You're on a dating app?
But it was because they were written in such a way that made them engaging, interesting, charming, humorous, flawed, and full of a great depth of story and motivation to the degree that it could serve as the rock around which the storm of the seasons blew. All of that stuff that I just talked about in regards to the villains and the narratives, well, we needed Sam and Dean to see that conflict through. Otherwise, it wouldn't have had a grounded point from which to develop. As time went on through the seasons, though, this reliance upon the central crew of cast, to which characters got added such as Castiel and, well, some others that maybe didn't stay around forever, but people like Crowley and Charlie and Kevin and Rowena and Bobby Singer. Actually, sorry, while we're talking about the side characters, and I've brought up all those pretty good and interesting ones who of course, inevitably fucking die as part of showing the seriousness of this new season situation, I think that very thing is indicative of the repetitiveness that occurs within the show, as it does truly keep happening about once every season or so that a character that the boys love or have worked with for a long time fucking bites it because of the hunting lifestyle or the boys' shenanigans.
Think in terms of bridges burned.
And that all really goes back to the first big gut punch time that they do it. And no, I'm not talking about John dying or Ash dying, like, those sucked, but I'm really focusing on Joe and Ellen going out in season 5.
You can go straight back to hell, you ugly bitch.
That was a huge moment, especially because of how much development we had seen of those two and their connection to each other and the boys. And it really sold us in the audience on how bad things had gotten when people close to the boys were dying out in ways that didn't even really hurt the big bads at all.
Somebody's gotta let him in. And like you said, you're not moving.
Yet, it seemed as if the show had been inspired by the impact of that, and felt like it needed to keep doing it, even when it didn't really matter a huge amount except for just giving us more Winchester suffering porn. And that point brings us back to the main cast and what the boys go through for the rest of the show after season 5. Because it is just a non-stop ride of them getting punted down and repeating the same mistakes over and over, of lying to each other and doing dodgy things and making big decisions that doom the world, before inevitably getting back together and being brothers again. Even when the show challenges the fact that the Winchesters have this clear toxic relationship, both in joke form and in a real storyline.
No, there is no other way, sir. I'm sorry.
It's not long before time passes and it all just goes back to the way that it was. Character advancement in those moments becomes stifled. It becomes buried under just an endless wave of the same pain and same drama that never really seems to go anywhere and is just sort of a bit tiring.
When I was drinking demon blood.
Come on, man, that's totally different.
Was it?
I think this sort of thing does happen with any show that goes on for so long without allowing its characters to drastically change in some gigantic way. Any show that does negate serious and huge ramifications by having a sometimes literal deus ex machina save them from having to make those big decisions. That does keep cramming them together until eventually they reach the end and then it can finally do something final and serious. Because for Supernatural, not having Sam or Dean be Sam and Dean would be basically a death knell, or would potentially risk the sweet little nest egg that the producers have on their hands. And so without a showrunner willing to put things on the line for a vision, then it becomes an economic decision rather than a creative one.
Hey, give me back my money.
Oh, no.
And that tiredness that I mentioned just before also applies to the other repeated characters that keep coming up in a show like this. The villains, or big bads as they come to be known. Very much like Buffy, which I guess there is a fair bit of actual similarity between these. And if I ever make a Buffy video, I might dive more into that at some point.
Sounds good, Buffy.
But the 10 seasons that came after that initial golden period, whose villains were iconic, like Azazel, or Ruby, or Lilith, or Lucifer, or all those angel goons like Raphael and Michael and Zachariah, well, the seasons afterwards had a bit of an issue, not in that they didn't have cool villains with cool villain moments. They absolutely did, I'm not going to argue that, but amidst all those cool villains, there was so much forgettable trash that basically functioned as filler while we waited for something to happen. In the first 5 seasons, the filler villains were actually quite interesting, served some function to illustrate elements of the greater moral ideas at play. Like Zachariah, a monstrous middle management angel whose whole goal was to enact the apocalypse as per the corporate plan.
Get my ducks in a row.
I am not one of your ducks.
Starting with your attitude.
And I think a big part of these villains not working in the later seasons was because it wasn't exactly clear where we were going with them, what we were trying to do. Season 6's Eve and the Alpha monsters are kind of a big nothing that doesn't even really connect to the Leviathans from Season 7 much at all.
I knew Eve, and honestly, your mommy was a whore.
And then when we get to Season 7, we've got fucking Edgar. Honestly, I wouldn't blame anyone for forgetting who Edgar is. All the Leviathans are generally pretty bad and boring and one-note, and that trend continues. Naomi, Abaddon, Gadriel, the Steins, the Mark of Cain, Dagon, the Men of Letters, and all of those villains who are either forgettable or just not interesting feeds into their narratives and their goals, becoming a blur too in that long watch time.
Alright. Let's crack this piñata.
Even the initially good villains like Lucifer end up becoming a shit show because Supernatural cannot stop bringing them back over and over and over because it is desperately trying to maintain engagement in its plot and thinks that bringing back a fan favourite is the way to do that. Honestly, do you know how many seasons Lucifer/Nick is listed as a villain for? He only appears at the very end of the initial run for Season 5. Until that point, he is this mysterious unknown villain whose very existence spawns fear in everyone around him.
Aren't you a surprise? You've come a long way to see this, haven't you?
After that, though, he comes back for 5 fucking seasons, during which any of that initial coolness and mystique drains away. A theme that really does occur a lot with all the stuff from the initial series. Angels, reapers, demons, all those mystical and terrifying supernatural creatures from the first 5 seasons gradually turn into fodder and become very easily killed and removed because the stakes need to keep getting ramped up and they become casualties of that.
So what's it gonna be?
They create new classes of monster to try and return some of the fear involved, but nothing is going to match the initial ominousness that was created by the appearance of demons, or angels, or Lucifer. And that idea of the repeated insertions and normalization of something actually being a hindrance or a harm to it does bring us very beautifully, almost like I'd planned this in my writing, to God and Season 15. But before I get into that Season 15 itself though, I do want to just consider God's appearances throughout the show until then, and how that ties into the big reveal at the end of Season 14 that God is the true endgame villain of this whole franchise, and has been basically playing with Sam and Dean this whole time, and even the whole universe as just part of his sick little stories that he finds joy from.
Father killing his own son.
Wait, what are you saying?
He's saying he's been playing us.
Now, the thing with that God identity that we get is that it's a tad confused by all the different appearances that we have seen of him. For a long time, God is this abstract idea that exists beyond our comprehension and barely interacts with the world except in rare and mysterious ways, like saving Sam and Dean from Lucifer breaking out of the cage. I mean, that buys into that initial part of Supernatural's lore establishment, which is that we and the boys are not meant to be able to know everything, that some things are just beyond what can be discovered, and the show even leaves us on a tiny little hint that maybe Chuck, the prophet of the Lord we meet earlier, is something more in the last time we see him during that initial run.
Nothing ever really ends, does it?
From then, God and Chuck don't appear until Well, technically he actually reappears during season 10 as a little surprise drop at the end of fan fiction, commenting on the portrayal of his story of Sam and Dean being made into a High School Musical, and sort of confirming what we learn in season 11, which is that Chuck was indeed God all along, and was merely playing a prophet to get to be part of the story and be involved in supposedly averting the apocalypse from the sidelines. Though we then learn as the seasons keep going by from that point that in reality, of course, Chuck had in fact created everything there and all those storylines as part of his attempt to get the Winchesters to kill each other and fulfill his extremely focused writer's vision of how things should end.
But it always ends the same. One brother killing the other.
But even that idea is kind of messy when you consider what occurs in season 11 to what occurs in season 14 and 15 with regards to Chuck's presentation. Where in the later seasons make him out to be this big master manipulator who is pulling all the strings and who uses free will as merely a guise for pushing his toys around on the board. Some gigantic asshole who barely views people as real. Also, dear God, consider that idea and then remember God having a relationship with Becky from earlier on. Kinda creepy, right? Like from God's perspective, it's basically him sleeping with someone he created and who he barely views as anything more than a character in a story.
Well?
It's awful. Horrible.
Sort of fucked up from that viewpoint in a gigantic way, but that whole master manipulator bit sort of feels at odds with the God that we see in season 11, who is shown as this deeply flawed person who fails his family and who is willing to die because of the failure that he feels, who isn't ready to fight until pushed into it by the brothers. I mean, the later seasons would have you believe then that because he has that omniscience and control, he sort of allowed the Winchesters to release his sister Amara, the person who can supposedly kill him, because it played into his big plan of getting one of them killed. And we sort of see later that God is indeed able to merge with Amara, and that maybe in some ways he's actually stronger than her.
We can go round and round, but you know me, in the end, I always get what I want.
I don't know, it makes the whole being injured in season 11 a potential ploy, a fake out designed to generate the story that he wanted? Who knows? The character basically did a 180 retcon of his whole deal, and that is sort of true for every time God keeps appearing in Supernatural. It just keeps breaking down any of the interesting things about him and degrades him into one of the bland villains who the boys have to take down with some magical crap that they discover in that final season. And don't worry, we're almost there, we're almost in season 15, it's just a second away. But it is such a shame to see God transformed from this gigantic question mark of maybe into this definitive of the ultimate big bad. The final, biggest and baddest, because when you escalate the threat every season, where the hell do you end but by having them fight the creator of everything and the ultimate power behind the universe?
And I tried, but you're all just too stupid.
That's the only way to keep it interesting, right? Or you could write something that's not just a continuation of the same repetitive bullshit that you've done so far and have been doing for fucking 10 seasons at this point, and which is something new and interesting. But of course, they didn't do that. They did just do the same thing. But they could have done something interesting and gone a new direction with it not just being a bigger, badder threat.
Sir, this is a Radio Shed?
Dean says I'm not going to get the ending I want.
So, season 15, the new end of Supernatural, the new finality of where everything comes together. And yes, it's another season filled with the boys trying to track down whatever MacGuffins they can to deal with God, who's going to destroy everything because that's what always keeps happening. It's always another apocalypse around here. And of course, we keep having the same family drama. This time with Castiel and Dean falling out, and Sam and Dean being at odds over what they can do to deal with God and their attitudes towards it. And yeah, it's very much the same things, just with a new slapping of paint for the end of the show.
Move. Dean, don't.
And on cue with how Supernatural has been playing so far, this season really does showcase them throwing everything at the wall to get people to tune in, bringing back everything that they can in an attempt to sort of make it vaguely feel as if it's tying all the stuff up from the last 15 seasons. With Bobby Singer, Kevin Tran, the Leviathans, Eve, Eileen, Lilith, Becky, Garth, Jody Mills, Ruby, Lucifer, and Michael showing up. It's the whole bloody shebang, and dear God, does it feel a tad desperate. And within that pile of just everything, the episodes as well just keep having moments that feel counterintuitive to all the stuff that we have learned so far. That feel as if they're going back in time and taking a huge dump on everything that we had learned previously and that developed our idea of the characters and the narrative.
Hey! Was that a trip? Yeah.
The hero's journey is a fantastic example of this. An idea that seems cool on the surface, namely in that it involves Sam and Dean discovering that they have been given luck and fortune by God for this whole time to ensure that they don't have to deal with normal people issues which would slow them down. And that now that they are opposed to God and his story, that luck is gone, which leads to them basically becoming fucking useless until they track down Fortuna in the next episode and regain their luck. Which is ridiculous for two reasons. The first being that it kinda completely negates all that Sam and Dean have ever learned and displayed and had from being hunters for decades by acting as if it was all supported by the ability to not deal with basic people issues.
Sorry, I'm
Sick. I know.
What's up with your teeth?
What?
Your teeth.
And secondly, it kinda removes that big character theme from the original series run. The idea that these are normal, regular mortals fighting against some big cosmic plan, and through human dedication and perseverance, they succeed despite it all. Which the reveal with God in this season basically declares that none of that was ever true, and it was all just part of him making them do it and ensuring that they would win. So, character arcs just get immediately destroyed, am I right? Ahaha, the story you thought was good was actually just some asshole's design all along. The Winchesters had literal plot armor, so there was never really any threat. Don't you feel tricked? And as if it undermines the whole bloody point and takes a gigantic dump on all the past work by all the past showrunners and writers. That's fun, right?
Because what? Because we're your favorite show? Because we're part of your story?
And it wouldn't be right for me to not mention Despair. The episode that ends with the big reveal that Castiel loves Dean. Loves Dean. Not just as his best friend and longest time ally, but in a probably kinda gay way.
Knowing you has changed me. Because you cared, I cared.
To the, I guess from the show's perspective, presumed happiness of all the Destiel fans. Except that this is occurring while Castiel is being sucked by the darkness into the supposed permadeath for angels, which kind of makes it feel a little bit like we're confirming the gay and then shooting the gay at the same time. And as many Destiel people have rightly pointed out, this doesn't really do anything for that ship. It doesn't really confirm anything that wasn't already known. It was all sort of clear that Castiel was obsessed with Dean.
Don't lose it over one man.
No, I can't.
And we don't really learn much more about Dean's own perspective on things, or the feelings that he has about Castiel, or how he even views that expressed love. We never learn that, because it's never really mentioned again by Dean before he just dies in the final episode. And yeah, it's final episode time. The last final episode, Swan Song, is an episode that I cannot express enough is one of the best episodes of all time, which really hammers home everything that we had learned in the previous 5 seasons, really showcases the importance of the characters to one another, that showcases the despondency and desperation felt in that last act of defiance, and that uses the Impala to develop the past and indicate how it will aid in the present to secure a victory for Team Free Will.
These are the things that make the car theirs. Really theirs.
a victory that comes at a great cost, but which also plays into the development that we have seen for all of our favourite characters. Carry On the other hand, is sort of self-satisfactory garbage. And look, I know they were dealing with COVID restrictions, which meant that it truly did feel like a whimper for the end of the show, rather than the bang that it should have been. I mean, Jesus Christ, you can tell that when we barely see any characters reappear for the end, because I guess they couldn't get the actors, and so we only really hear about stuff going on in the background.
Rufus lives about 5 miles that way, and your mom and dad, they got a place over yonder.
But the show ends with the stupidest fucking reversal of what happened last time, as Dean just randomly dies to a spike in a barn while they're hunting vampires, and Sam packs up the bunker and goes on to have a kid with a mystery woman who, I suppose, doesn't really matter, I guess, because she's a blur in the background. I mean, I'd like to think it's Eileen, because at least that would tie into something of the anything at all that we've learned, but we just don't know that, and it's not like it helps because she's just a faceless figure. And then Sam dies, and Sam and Dean meet up in the new heaven that lets people hang out together.
Hey, Sammy.
What the fuck is this shit? Seriously, honestly, the finale character arcs for both of our guys is that Sam returns to what he was sort of aiming to do before this whole thing started, and Dean just dies. No big reunions either, no big showcases of what happened in the world for our other characters really, just a bunch of meandering around and then play the song, show the car. That's sort of iconic, right? And suggests the circular nature of the story and of life.
I told you, I've got to get back by Monday. Right.
I mean, Supernatural definitely feels like it's been circling the fucking drain, and this was just the final desperate gasp before it got sucked down the pipes. But it is just such an absolute letdown that the resolution is one that doesn't exactly feel as if it ties into all the stuff that we have seen built up over the last 15 years. That it's just Dean randomly dying to some rusty iron. Because, I don't know, oops, no longer the hero, and so accidental, uninteresting endings is the way to go. I mean, if you think about it, isn't that sort of a commentary on the fact that the writer of the show within the universe is gone now? That with God no longer around and being involved, there isn't such a thing as a big flashbang of an ending for people. That things do just happen like that. Yeah, I suppose that's sort of interesting within the universe to think about for a second there. But then you remember that this is a fucking show that exists as a thing for us to watch. And so having it feel as if the writers outside of the show gave up on it and just went, I don't know, let's just have Dean die, what about it? Kinda looks like a bit of a cop-out.
Hey, did I ever tell you, you know, Dad hadn't come back from his hunting trip?
And doesn't that just speak to what Supernatural ended up being? A show that dragged on far beyond what it should have because it was worth a lot of money and got a lot of views in its time slot. And so every move made, every decision chosen was done to ensure that they could keep that nest egg growing and cash cow milking until eventually it just didn't matter anymore. I mean, it became an iconic example of keeping things alive longer than they need to be. And that's my strong takeaway from all of this. Sometimes it's okay to have things end. And I know that the system we live in for media is one that sees anything worth any amount of money as something that needs to be drained until it no longer spits out cash. But all that draining does is also suck out the passion, the love, the interest, and the good. All you're left with is a sad end for a sad show that was once a prized piece of television history. From a creative perspective, it's good to end things when they should end. And maybe in respect to the original creator of Supernatural, it's worth considering those first 5 seasons as the actual show, and the rest is just fan fiction made to appease an audience's desire for more of the content and characters that they liked.
Who's that?
Oh, that's Adam, John Winchester's other kid. He's still trapped in the cage.
But I don't want to end this video on a dour note. And I also kind of want it to be clear that within those 10 seasons afterwards, I can still find plenty of stuff that I love. Enough that it keeps me coming back and rewatching all of it so that I can just get to those moments. Each season still has fantastic episodes that are great watches, and it still has actors doing an amazing job with the roles that they have been given, as well as cool new characters who show up and get a chance to shine.
Bit of a prima donna, if you ask me.
Rowena, Charlie, Kevin, honestly, kind of Crowley. These are all great inclusions to the world that we would not have gotten if it hadn't kept rolling. And episodes like We Need to Talk About Kevin, The Man Who Would Be King, The French Mistake, and of course Baby. I mean, oh god, how can we think about supernatural episodes without looking at Baby?
So Dean, I don't believe what you're hunting is a whisper.
What an absolute banger. Just giving us a real insight to the value of the Impala, showing us that through the perspective of only ever being in the car, of a classic Night Moves brotherly moment sing-along.
Come on now. Working on a night moves.
I love that episode, and we would never have got it if it wasn't for the show making it to season 11. The humour is also still a huge pull that keeps the show going, and there are really amazing moments that stand out too. Like the angels falling from heaven at the end of season 8, when Metatron closes the gates and kicks them out with the unwitting help of Castiel.
We're falling.
Yet it is undeniably true that the best of the best episodes do all still come from those earlier seasons, when everything felt as if it had a place and was working towards something, where it was fresh and new and felt important. Ultimately, that got lost over time, and the sheen really wore off. And that is sort of what went wrong with Supernatural. Keeping a show going for that long is just a huge challenge, and not one that is easily done, and having it end in a satisfactory manner is even trickier. Sometimes you push your luck, you drag things out too far and don't change stuff enough, and inevitably it all comes crumbling down. Yes, you have to carry on, but you still do need to find that peace when you are done, to lay your weary head to rest.
You can go now.
And that's a Supernatural video. I hope that you liked it, or found it to be interesting, or just was okay with being satisfactory background noise. This is a bit of a different video, I'll admit, from my normal stuff on the channel, although I am, in respect to what I've just discussed, attempting to change what I do here. Because the trans videos are kind of getting me a little bit bored right now, and are not hitting as well as they used to, and so I'm taking this as a good opportunity to mix up what I make here. So, if you like this, that's fantastic, and I hope that you'll enjoy the stuff I do in the future too. If you really like what I do on this channel and want to keep supporting me in my journey going forwards, the best way to do that is by going to the links down below and subscribing to my Patreon or to my Ko-Fi. The names of those in the $5 category should be scrolling past the screen right now, and I am so appreciative to everyone on there for allowing me to keep doing what I do. It helps to pay for stuff like my rent, power, internet, food, cat, and transition, which is all kind of essential and useful to letting me make these videos, and to let me write them out and edit and record them, which does take a fair bit of time and would be somewhat tricky to do if I was working a full-time job as well. So yeah, I am hugely thankful to all of the people here, and also motivated by the people that want to pay money to see me keep going. Because it tells me that what I'm doing is interesting enough to some people, or worth it to some people enough that they would like to see it continue. And as I mentioned beforehand, yeah, I've got a bunch of really cool ideas in the works here. Next month is sort of looking like it might be First Blood, Love Island, a video on trans dating, and potentially, probably actually for January, a Steven Universe video, which I know, A Lily making a Steven Universe video? Ugh, yikes. But I'm kind of doing it because I want to sort of make a good video that will hopefully ensure that people stop confusing me with Lily Orchard. Honestly, please, stop doing that. It's not good. It is not a good thing. I like to think I'm better than the quality of video that is found there. Especially after watching that Pokemon video. Dear God, I should make a Pokemon video as well, actually. I love Pokemon. It's a huge thing I spend all my time on. But anyway, once more, huge thanks to everyone on the Patreon, and also a huge thanks to everybody who watches this video, who subscribes, who shares, who likes, who comments, does all the YouTube things that sort of gives engagement to the video, which I think YouTube likes. And also, thank you to everyone who's made it this far too. I hope that you really enjoyed this video, and I also hope that you have a fantastic day.